Kerry, thanks very much for joining me this afternoon for me and this morning for you, I believe. How are plumbing manufacturers holding up on your side of the pond?
I think overall they're doing pretty well. I don't think business demands are obviously not what they were. In the U.S. with COVID-19 pandemic underway, many states closed construction projects, and that has, of course, delayed orders and material requirements. Many of our members have swapped out some of their activity to produce personal protective equipment. So you can see a number of folks in medical facilities wearing face shields that say Kohler at the top, and frankly, other companies have done the same. There's an effort to help address the problems that COVID-19 have created, and at the same time, folks are trying to keep their factories and their manufacturing employees and their other employees working on a regular basis. As I mentioned, I think there certainly is an economic hit here, and I anticipate that some of our members will suffer some pretty, I'll say, significant sales volume drops during this time, because the bright spot here is mostly in home renovation, because as America sent all of its workers home to work from home, I think a lot of them started to look around and think, oh, wait a minute, I really meant to do X. And so amazingly, in most states in the US, all the home supply and the home building shops are open. All the big box retailers are open. And the parking lots in those stores are jammed. Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards and others. So there's a lot of energy still in the remodeling space at the moment. But our members rely on not only remodeling, but new home building, which has slowed a bit. And of course, commercial building, which is, I would say, the meat and potatoes of our industry, in addition, obviously, to homes. But so, yeah, I think it's been a difficult time, but I think folks have found ways to be productive. And more importantly, are busy at the work of finding ways to continue to operate their businesses as normally as you can during a pandemic, but also finding ways to protect their employees from either being ill, or if they are ill, how to keep them away from everybody else, so that their employee teams can continue to operate.
And over here in the UK, like you experienced almost overnight, when social distancing requirements were introduced, sales volumes really did dip in an unprecedented and dramatic way. I think our journey back into operation has been a little different to yours, in that the new build construction has been the first back online, and actually our RMI, as we call it, the home remodeling. Right. I think everyone within the bathroom industry understands the potential for that, because people have been stuck inside looking at rooms that they can't stand and thinking about their next project. But I think a lot's going to come down to consumer confidence and how is the wider economy looking towards the next couple of quarters. Is there going to be the confidence to sink a little bit of that spare cash into bathroom improvement projects, or are people going to kind of want to keep the money in the bank just in case something happens with their job? So I think we're in for a really interesting time, a very difficult time to make predictions. I think that's something our members are struggling with, actually. What should their budgets look like in 2021? But I will say I've been on a call with many of our members over the course of the last couple of days, and there's cautious optimism. Sales volumes are higher than they were expecting in the recovery, and there's reasons for us to consider a lot of the upside risks as well as the downside risks.
Yeah.
So What's government action? I know it's a hell of a lot more complicated in the US because you have different layers of government than we have here in the UK. But how's the government response to the COVID crisis have impacted your members?
Well, I think to your point, Tom, we've got 50 states, and so the federal government took a different perspective this time around, where they basically said the states are in charge. The states will have to manage this crisis, and depending where you were, if you were in Wisconsin, for example, the governor there really, for the most part, operated with a pretty light touch. Not always, but by and large, operated with a light touch. If you're in Massachusetts, the governor was much more strict because they had a much higher volume, if you will, of infection and cases. And so the short answer is it really varied dramatically based on where you were in the country. California, obviously being the largest state in the U.S., the governor was very strict there and shut down most businesses. And so a lot of our members, had either had their plants closed because they were ordered to do so, or if they were able to stay open because they were deemed essential, which frankly was a lot of what the association did in the first weeks of the crisis. Is in the U.S. we define plumbers as essential service providers in any crisis. You need water, you need clean, you need sanitation. And so we spent a lot of time on the phone with governors and members of state government, making the case for why plumbing manufacturers were also essential businesses. So we spent a lot of time there. But again, it often goes back to, kind of where you were in what state, how strong the government was, how high the infection rates were. In instances where members did have infection, COVID cases in their plants, I think they acted responsibly and quickly. In one instance I'm aware of, they identified somebody who had COVID-19. That person was sent home to quarantine. They closed the plant for 2 days, did a thorough cleaning throughout the plant, and then were able to bring people back to work. So, I jokingly say it's the Harvard Business School answer, which is it depends. And it really does depend on where you were in the country and how you were impacted.
And in the UK, we've had a similar situation in Scotland, where the devolved administration has taken a much more conservative line on the construction industry coming back than in England and the rest of the UK. Not as acute an issue as the one you've described, Kerry, but nevertheless, it has been something which has been perhaps more marked than in other on other policy issues since the history of the founding of the devolved administrations in the UK. What do you think the long-term changes will be in our marketplace as a result of COVID-19? It's one of the frequent kind of topics of conversation when I speak to my members is around have channels to market change forever because of the ability of the internet to continue to deliver at a time when actual physical retailers have perhaps had to pare back their operations. Is that something that you're considering as well?
Well, I think what we're sort of seeing two things. From the market-facing standpoint, I think many of the U.S. companies recognize there's real opportunity here. And when you think about what does that look like? The rise of touchless fixtures is expected to be enormous in terms of, to your point earlier about confidence. When you think about how much travel goes on every day, typically in the U.S. and and across the globe, frankly, do consumers have confidence when they find themselves in public restrooms and in other public facilities about the cleanliness and the decontamination of those spaces? you start to look at what will give people confidence. And funny enough, what we find ourselves spending a lot of time talking about is how much growth there is potentially in touchless fixtures, where people do not want to grab handles and turn on faucets and don't want to touch a toilet to flush it, and on and on and on and on. And so there's sort of that side of the discussion about, okay, what market opportunities are going to exist? How are we, what things will we be developing and inventing that people will take comfort from as they reemerge back into the world. This other side of that is for our members and our manufacturers, a lot of the question I think about our business floats around, is there a vaccine? Mm-hmm. And I don't really think it's a if question, it's kind of more of a when question. But having some sense of stability and some sense of predictability is really vital. No business person I know wants to operate in a world in which they don't have some ability to anticipate what's coming. Stability can be I'll say an asset for most business folks. And so we're in that kind of place where it's not 100% clear what's to come. And we do have the same problem, which is, can we get people to come back? Even if they've been, working from home and are comfortable, do they want to come back? And if they do, what are the terms and the circumstances under which that can happen? Are we going to have to are people going to have to walk through temperature checks at the doorways? What kind of, I think it's a restructuring and it's a rethinking about the way we keep people working together. I talked with one manufacturer who is talking about perhaps having, I guess they call it switch shifts, where in order to maintain social distancing, they'll have half of an office come in for a period of a week or two, and then those folks will go home and stay home for 2 weeks, and the other half of the office will come in and occupy their desks and do their work from the office. And then there's some who are saying, well, maybe we don't need the offices. We've gotten people to work from home. They seem comfortable. Maybe that's not a need. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in the U.S., certainly I anticipate we're going to see a lot of rethinking of what traditional workforce looks like. Mm-hmm. I'm a 30-plus year brick and mortar guy. I went into the office every day. But even PMI has decided a distributed team makes a great deal of sense. And so our team members work from all over the country. There is no brick and mortar for PMI specifically. We do have an office, but by and large, we don't have to use it very often. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of folks are rethinking. So, I see some of that activity. I see the market activity. And then the big running issue is safety. Whether it's in the factory or it's in the offices, the question is, how do you make sure people are comfortable and make sure that your office is not going to contribute to harm?
Yeah, I think I'd echo all of the kind of observations that you've made in your analysis of some of the permanent changes that might be coming. Additionally, as part of a wider construction industry community within the UK, we're all considering now, how do we come back and restart our industry better than it was before? Right. And that's covering things like getting net zero carbon building to be an actual real prospect within a matter of kind of months and years rather than decades. So that's a really exciting development. And digitalization through kind of building information modeling and innovations such as smart marking of products is another part of that. There's nothing off the table, and I think that is really makes this, whilst it's undoubtedly tremendously challenging, also quite an exciting time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so, because for our industry, whether it's based in the UK or it's in the US or anywhere else in the world, one of the great things about this industry is that we have continued to innovate on a long-running basis. It's not like we hit a single and a double and the game's over. We just keep swinging. And so I'm very optimistic that our folks have the ability to adapt and to find both new products and new opportunities here. Your comment about the carbon footprint is really pretty timely, because one of the things that you can do in today's world, it's kind of amazing, frankly, is that you can look at sort of what cities and countries look like now with everybody working from home. And you can see how much less pollution there is, how much less, I'll say, environmental damage there is. It's really mind-boggling. And so I think you're right. At the 40,000 foot level, folks can start to look and say, wait a minute, maybe we don't need to go back to that old way. I think about it in the Washington area. We have 2 beltways that run around the city, and those are parking lots during rush hour, early morning and early and late afternoon. And now you can drive around those things quite freely because most folks are not driving. And you sort of begin to think about, wait a minute, could we rework our process? Could we rework the way that we interact? And whether it's a software product like what we're using right now, or other kinds of team tools, I think it is going to give our industry a chance to rethink the way they work. There's certainly a piece of our business that still loves face-to-face and will continue to do face-to-face. But I think there's also this opportunity for folks to say, well, maybe we don't have to be in the same building at the same time. And that has a positive impact on our community. I think in manufacturing, it's always been an acceleration. There has been for a while now. In the manufacturing side, there's a lot of acceleration around automating systems, the use of various, I'll call them software tools to streamline factory operations. I don't imagine that's going to slow down at all. If anything, this would accelerate it because you do have those safety issues of, hopefully keeping people safe and apart. And our members were doing that now. Folks have temperature checks at the door. They are asking people to identify, if they're not feeling well. There's a whole series of things. They're spacing people out in the plants, making it more possible for people to work at slight distances, or keeping fewer people in a department during a period. There's a whole series of things that they can do. And it speaks to the innovation that our members generally operate with. That's sort of the mindset in our industry. You have to come up with new things. You have to come up with new ways of doing things. I teasingly say to people, wait a minute, we just invented a rocket that you can shoot astronauts off into space and recover the rocket to reuse for another mission. What's next? Talking to the water faucet? But indeed, you can talk to the water faucet in today's world. And that's part of that continuing invention. And the marketplace issue is going to be an interesting one because, of course, in the U.S., largely our products are sold either through home improvement centers or through distributors. And I think that's a long-running question about, to your point, will the internet become the disintermediation tool? And most of our members do sell their products on the internet. You can buy them if you want to. It's now an additional channel as opposed to an only channel. You can sell them through distributors. You can have a showroom. You can have the internet. I always think it's amazing to me, but I love the fact that it works this way. You can buy a toilet on the internet in the U.S. No problem. You can just look them up and buy one. It doesn't strike me as a common thing, but the reality is that's how it works now.
And that's probably here to stay. In your answer there, Kerry, you mentioned that there's no substitute at all for having face-to-face meetings. obviously we're doing more of this like you are, but I'm looking forward to welcoming you to back to the UK for our conference next June, which has been postponed. But it's always a highlight of the event hearing from you on the US experience, and look forward to that next year now.
Likewise, we're still scheduling our conference for November in San Diego, California. So if all things go well, we hope you'll be able to join us then too.
Fingers crossed. Kerry, thanks very much for your time this afternoon.
My pleasure. It's good to see you.